What did Darth Vader do in his free time? The full-time job of a Sith Lord is no joke. From defeating rebels or hunting down surviving Jedi, Vader's life was very busy. But outside from being on the constant battlefield, what did Vader do in the little free time that he had? Well, he did a few things outside of fighting, and although it might sound crazy, there were actually a few things that brought him joy. Let's get right into it. After Vader was burnt on Mustafar, he became very limited in what activities he could do. He was basically restricted from living a normal human life. Normal activities such as eating and sleeping were some of the most difficult challenges for him. So because of this, he found new alternatives for him to do. One of the things that brought him joy were the multiple palaces he owned throughout the galaxy. Although we've seen the fortress that he owned on Mustafar, this wasn't the only one that he owned. Bast Castle was one of them. This was a private fortress that Vader owned that was near a beach on the planet of Vijun. When he wouldn't be on assignment for Sidious, he would visit here to do multiple things. One of the things he did was visit the droid workshop here in the castle. Vader would use the mechanical skills he learned as a young boy and would then modify his personal TIE fighter. Although Vader was so far gone into the ways of the dark side, it's almost as if he always had that inner child still within him, always building and fixing things. Not only this, but he'd also spend a lot of time here against training droids. He did this to perfect his lightsaber combat skills. You have to understand, he was forced to live in his life support suit, so this required him to make a lot of adjustments to both his combat style and his mobility. Aside from this though, there was one more thing that Vader did throughout the multiple palaces that he owned, and this was to spend time in his meditation chamber. Vader's meditation chamber was one of the things that brought him the most peace. This chamber was designed so he could breathe here without the mask. Since eating became such a difficult thing for Vader to do, the meditation chamber became sort of like an escape for him. Normally, if Vader wanted to eat, he would have to eat Vita paste that would be entered through tubes in his suit, and then he'd eat the paste from straws. It was a really painful process for him. But when he'd be in his meditation chamber, he had the freedom to remove his helmet and just relax for a little bit. Here, he could eat protein liquids and different types of food instead of just paste. Although he did enjoy being in his chamber, there were also times where he actually hated it. This is where he'd mourn Padme's death the most. Because he'd be so lonely here, a lot of his time was spent thinking of the horrific choices that he made that led to her death. He carried a lot of guilt and regret for what he did. If Vader wasn't in his meditation chamber, he'd also sometimes be in his Bacta tank. We saw this tank in both Rogue One and Kenobi. The Bacta tank was used for multiple reasons. The first reason was because it allowed him to heal and ease his pain. Now keep in mind, his injuries on Mustafar were way too severe for the Bacta to fully heal him, but it did help remove some of the pain he had. You have to understand, when he'd wear his suit, he'd always be in a constant pain. The reason for this was because it was practically a life support system. Sidious designed it like this on purpose so that Vader's connection to the dark side would only be stronger. He wanted him to always be filled with anger and hatred. So because of this, he'd always have constant needles injected into his flesh to transmit data. Imagine walking around all day with needles constantly in you. Well, that's what Vader went through. That's why the Bacta tank was kind of a relief for him, because he could just remove the suit and it allowed him to recover. But these were really the main ways that Vader would spend a majority of his free time. Now keep in mind, he did of course go on a lot of side missions here and there, in which I'll be covering more videos on very soon, but these were really the things that brought him somewhat an enjoyment to his life. Over time, he started to rely on these activities more and more, especially after he let go of his obsession with Kenobi. During his early years as Vader, Kenobi was basically a main priority for him. He would constantly search and hunt him down for years until they finally had their rematch. After this encounter, he finally learned to let this obsession go, and Palpatine reminded him that he serves him now, not Kenobi. This then allowed him to then focus his time towards other areas. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a little bit more of what Vader did in his free time. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you always.